Hello everyone, welcome to the Composting Collaborative's April webinar. My name is Charlotte Dreisen and I'm a project manager with Green Blue, one of the founding partners of the Composting Collaborative. We have an outstanding lineup of speakers today and I'm so looking forward to their presentations and the discussion we'll have afterwards. Today we'll be focusing on the food service and restaurant perspectives of diverting food waste to composting. I won't give you the rundown of our speakers in detail today, I'll let them introduce themselves. But I would like to thank them all for participating in the Composting Collaborative webinar today and lending their time and expertise. We'll first hear from Jeff Clark, Program Director for the National Restaurant Association's Conserve program, and he'll set the stage by sharing some insights from their recent State of Restaurant Sustainability Report, as well as learnings from their action guides they collaborated with ReFed to produce. Next, we'll learn from the experiences of two different food service operators. First, Wes Benson, the Franchise Affairs and Sustainability Manager with Taco Time Northwest, and then Renaud DeRosier with Amy's Kitchen, who recently embarked on the journey themselves. And last but certainly not least, we'll hear from Ryan Walter, founder of the Compost Crew, about issues a compost manufacturer and hauler would like to emphasize in the food service operator and restaurant space as a processor. And without further ado, Jeff, I'd love to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. I'm excited about this presentation as well. Basically, a little bit about myself. I work at the National Restaurant Association. I've been here about 5 years. Anything related to sustainability usually comes across my desk, and we've been getting more and more into the food waste issues and food waste challenges within restaurants in the past few years. We're also founding members of the Food Waste Reduction Alliance, along with the Groceries Manufacturers Association and Food Marketing Institute. So a lot of the information I'll be pulling from today, we did research, both with either ReFed or within the National Restaurant Association. And let me know if you have any questions. I'm sure we'll take them all at the end. So the restaurant business, as I'm sure you'll hear, is very large and very complex. There's around 1 million locations in the United States with about 14.7 million employees. Surprisingly enough, the average turnover rate in the industry is about 70% per year. So some locations are much higher than that, some locations are lower than that, and it can be a real challenge to train up these employees and then have them leave within that year, and you have to train someone new on composting efforts within your restaurant. So while that seems trivial, it is actually a challenge for the restaurant industry for a thin profit margin business that it is. But you can see it's quite large, nearly $800 billion in 2017 for sales. And we also produce a lot of food waste, unfortunately. About 40% is the consumer-facing businesses, according to ReFed. And while groceries produce the highest, you can see full service, institutional food service, and limited service also create quite a lot of food waste. So kind of what we want to talk about today is taking food from restaurants and getting it all the way through the sorting, the hauling, the actual compost effort into finished compost, and then of course at some point hopefully reusing it back in the restaurant for food. And so you just have the nutrient cycle going through within our economy. That's the goal, of course. But as you can see from a food service packaging layout we did a while back that is very similar to food itself, it's complicated. And restaurants have only a very small portion of this whole piece of the pie. So when looking at what to do for both food service and full service restaurants, ReFed kind of charted out, okay, here are some likely easier to implement efforts and the feasibility of doing them. And you can see there, I'm not going to go through these, it's quite complicated, we have the reports are online, but you can see it's pretty complex. A lot are more feasible than others. Waste tracking, of course, rises to the top. But food service and full service restaurants are also very different. You can't do one in the other, and if you do quick service or what's often called fast casual, where you order ahead and so you order and they make it while you're at the processing line, can be really different in how restaurants approach food waste and what they can do in a feasible way. And again, these are available online at ReFed if you'd like to get them. So why is this even important to the industry? Well, every year we do a What's Hot survey, and sustainability rose very high again this year. And food waste for the first time is in the top 5. So it's been in the top 10 before, but it did really rise up from this survey, which is the American Culinary Federation. It's a bunch of chefs. This year was about 700. In years past, it's been 1,300 different chefs responding. And it is a real driver of where the industry is going in the future. The problem, of course, is food costs vary. And traditionally, food costs are very low. In the past couple of years, they've been exceedingly low, but food costs are rising now. As we did a survey in December 2017, 4 in 10 restaurant operators said food costs will increase for them in the next 12 months. And along with that additional food cost, you have more attention going to food waste. You can see, again, this great result of as prices go up, more restaurateurs are planning to devote more resources to reducing food waste. And the vast majority of that, what those efforts are going to be, is actually tracking, because it's easier and very costs not so much money, hopefully, but it can be more challenging to do other efforts. So we can see tracking food waste, at least self-reported. We have about not quite 50% of restaurateurs saying that they track their food waste, the vast majority of which track daily and with pen and paper. Now, that may not be the most efficient, and that may not be the best way to get comparable results between locations, but at least it's a start. So what about composting, which is, of course, the issue that this webinar is about? We did, again, the same survey, and we found, according to 500 restaurateurs, that about 14% say that they compost. 9% in the front of the house, 4% back of the house only, and 1% both front and back of house. This was a little higher than I thought it was going to be, to be perfectly honest, and I'm happy to see the results, but we can, of course, go much, much further. If they're not composting, why are they not composting? Well, you can see the top 2 are lack of composting facility, which is, as we all know, a big challenge in the industry. Insufficient space. A lot of locations are space constrained. So when you look at something like a hotel kitchen that does composting, so World Wildlife Fund did this great pilot project called hotelkitchen.org, they have a lot more space. It's a bigger building. They have a whole bigger footprint, so they're able to add bins. And it's a different animal than just a restaurateur by itself. So while many of the same best practices in a hotel versus a restaurant kitchen would be the same, we do find that it's a challenging lack of space of many restaurateurs. And of course, the other top one is they don't know why they don't compost. And I don't think many people are aware of the impacts and positive benefits that you can get from composting food waste from their business. So we also have this growing issue of food being eaten off premise. So right now, when you look at what's called quick service, so think of McDonald's, think of Chipotle, think of Starbucks, the vast majority of many of their food is consumed off premise. But it is a growing segment of the restaurant industry, and that many of both families, casual dining, and fine dining are looking to expand how much off-premise dining they're going to have in the coming years. So this is important because if the food leaves your restaurant, you can no longer control how it is being disposed of. It is, of course, the consumer's responsibility to then dispose of it properly. And what we're also seeing is, according to, again, surveys that we've done, that what the current customer demographic, how important it is, less than 35 years old, 35 to 54 years old, 55 and older. You can see the 35 to 50 is an extremely important demographic, but in the coming 5 years, that's going to change dramatically and skew much younger, to the tune of an increase of around an average of 19% to a less than 35-year-old demographic for customers in the coming years. Why does that matter? Because younger customers tend to eat and prefer food that's served off-premise that they can take with them. As the economy grows, as more employment is occurring within the industry, more people are going to have less time. Fewer and fewer meals will be served at home, but they also want to get home, so they're going to buy food and take it home with them. So this has serious ramifications for how waste is handled in the United States. And I think, instead of going through the details of what restaurateurs can do, we need to have, in part, of course, it's very important to talk to restaurants, a new sort of policy discussion and infrastructure discussion within the United States with local governments and, frankly, with our national government about how we're going to handle both business incentives, reducing the infrastructure deficit that we have for composting, but then also working within communities to educate consumers about how and where their food should go and why it's important to recycle these nutrients through our whole economy, from waste all the way through to food, composting, and then, of course, back to food again. And many restaurateurs have done this and really educated their employees, but it is a challenge. As you can see, organics, composting, and regulations, while we don't endorse regulating food waste, we do see some of the benefits of increasing infrastructure and access to a lot of these composting facilities. So again, I'm open to questions at the end and happy to answer any questions that anyone may have, and I'm excited to hear about the rest of the presentation. And my email is jclark@restaurant.org if anyone would like to reach out. So I'll turn it over to Wes Benson at Taco Time.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Charlotte. Thanks for the opportunity to present to the group today. My name is Wes Benson. I'm with Taco Time Northwest. My background is in compliance and sustainability. For Taco Time Northwest, I pretty much focus on composting, energy efficiency, and our solar program. Before I launch into my story about the composting program, I'd like to say a couple of things. First of all, as far as main takeaways that I would want to emphasize from the beginning, and I'll touch on these in the end as well, we didn't enter into the composting program with this idea in mind to begin with, but I would want to say that this has ended up being a huge competitive advantage for our company locally. Our customer counts over the first 5 years of our composting program are up over 40%. Sales are up more than that. Because we have focused on committing to 100% compostable, it's really become a part of our story for the company. I mean, and this is really, it's the word, word has gotten around about our composting program really kind of organically. It's pretty much been word of mouth. We don't really toot our horn too much about this, about composting. But one thing that I would want to say is it's given our product a greater perceived value, and it's allowed us to charge more for our food. As I don't know how familiar all of you are with the economy in Seattle, but everything is getting more expensive here, and it's been really important for us to be able to have our prices keep pace with the costs, with our costs of doing business. And composting has been really important for us in that, as far as getting that done. So what I would want to say is, if environmental issues are important to consumers in your region, if it's important for your target demographic, and you're willing to be an early adopter in your area by working with municipalities, working with composters, as Jeff was talking about, going 100% compostable could be a huge advantage for you as well. So there's that. And then also, before I start, I just want to say a couple things. We couldn't have made this program successful without a lot of help. So first of all, I would want to recognize Cedar Grove Composting, specifically Susan Toman, Michelle Riggs, and Stephen Banchero at Cedar Grove. They've been super responsive, highly motivated, and have always had a great attitude in the face of enormous challenges. I mean, Jeff touched on the number of challenges involved locally to really make composting work. I mean, and it really takes a motivated composter who's willing to partner in multiple directions to get it done. So Cedar Grove has just been fabulous. Also, equally as important, I would want to recognize Pat Kaufman at Seattle Public Utilities. It's really important to have local government be an active partner in making this work and getting the word out. So he's been super helpful and has always had great ideas, been super willing to partner in any innovations we've been interested in. So just wanted to make sure that it was clear, as Jeff mentioned, that you really need to partner with the stakeholders to make this work. So let me see. 2010, Seattle Public Utilities, City of Seattle, put out its food and packaging ordinance. So the gist of that is that all food waste and then all packaging served in the dining room needs to be either recyclable or compostable. Our first reaction, Taco Time Northwest's first reaction in reviewing the ordinance, I'll be honest, the words nanny state were used, the words non-business people making business decisions were used. I'm sure you all remember the economy in 2010 was pretty tough. So the bottom line at that point was, what's the minimum we're going to need to do to comply with this new ordinance? Because what was most familiar to all of us was a 3-bin system, a compost, recycle, and garbage bin, that's what we started with. We spent a lot of time figuring out what would be the most logical way to present signage, how to set up a sorting area, and we chose a test location very carefully. The general manager of that location, super passionate about environmental issues, super passionate about making the test work, and the location that we chose, great location in the middle of Seattle. I mean, there's going to be no population that you're going to find that would be more willing to do what was necessary to sort things properly and to make the program work. And we ran the test for 3 months, and no matter what we did, we were tweaking the signs. We would station someone at the sorting area to answer questions and to give advice. And we just kept finding that 9 out of every 10 bags of either recycling or compost were contaminated. It just took one person in a hurry, one person to be careless, to totally ruin a bag of compost or a bag of recycling. So, we were facing higher costs, paying for generic compostables. They were way more expensive than our standard packaging. We were paying to have a third truck drive out to the location every week to empty a mostly empty compost bin. We weren't seeing any benefits. It was just really bad for business. So, we kind of sat back and we were talking to each other, what are we going to do about this? I mean, and it's important to remember one thing. Taco Time Northwest is a local Pacific Northwest company. We have locations in Western Washington and a few in Eastern Washington, but that's it. So, our customers are our neighbors, they're our family and friends, so the issues that are important to them are important to us. And, they're constantly questioning us, making sure that we're aligning with their values and we're not cheating in any way. And so we looked at how the initial test went and we just thought, this isn't working. We can't do without a compost bin in the dining room. So what can we do? So at that point we asked, well, what if we really embraced this packaging ordinance? What if we really embraced composting? What if we made everything in the dining room compostable? What if we took sorting completely out of the equation? What would that cost? So we looked at that, and I mean, it was a chunk, but it wasn't nearly as bad as we thought. So let's move to the next slide here. So what we did was we basically, instead of having a 3-bin system, we reinstalled all of our old garbage bins, but we relabeled them as compost only. So basically, instead of having to figure out, okay, well, this goes in here, this goes in here, this goes in here. I mean, everything could just go straight into the compost bin the way it used to go straight into the garbage bin. Now you'll notice there, so on the left, there are to the two larger signs. Those are on the doors as kind of like the composting message. And then you'll notice above there's a separate message because there are 3 items that we send out to the dining room that are not compostable still. It's single-use juice boxes, single-use milk bottles. Both of those are for children's meals, and then mint wrappers. Everything else is compostable that goes out there. So initially, I mean, this is a very nice, very polished presentation here. Initially, we just put a tiny, little office-sized garbage on the top of the garbage bin with a sign like that on it, and so we went ahead and started that as a test. And I got to tell you, not only did the incidence of contamination fall right off a cliff. I mean, we just got clean bag after clean bag after clean bag of compost. There's no issues with sorting. The juice, the milk, and the mint wrappers are all super low usage items. In fact, we couldn't get rid of them, but so it's they're really the contamination issue just kind of went away at that point. So there was no training needed for employees. There was no sorting needed for the customers. So it just worked like a charm. So one thing that I want to say, from the very beginning, we got this massive, passionate, positive response from our customers. I mean, passionate. It was so strong from, not just face-to-face in the restaurant, but it was so strong online. It was so strong, people calling in, saying, thank you for doing this. Thank you for making it so much easier. I know that must cost you more. Thank you so much for making that decision. So, I mean, that kind of made us sit back and talk to one another and said, well, so, what if we made this more than just a Seattle thing? What if we wanted to take it to all 78 of our locations? I mean, what would that cost, and what would the hurdles be involved as far as doing that? Well, so definitely it was still a chunk as far as cost-wise, but with 78 locations buying, we all of a sudden got into economies of scale. So what that meant was instead of buying generic compostables, we could buy compostable bags, compostable cups, compostable souffle cups, etc., with our logo on it. So we didn't lose any of the marketing power of our packaging because we were able to buy as a system. So we presented that idea to our franchisees, and I mean, they were kind of at the same place that we were when Seattle came out with the packaging ordinance. They weren't that excited, and they didn't really understand why we were embracing this, no matter that we showed them the positive feedback and the actual cost projections, etc. So, I mean, honestly, we ended up having to show leadership. We basically required all of our franchisees to come along with us. So, and that was tough for a short period of time, but honestly, as soon as the system was in, the simplicity of the system and the immediate top-line sales increases, it really made the case for us. It made all the sense in the world. And I would want to add there that Cedar Grove Composting, they stretched themselves immediely to cover as many of our locations as possible. I mean, without them doing that, it would have been so much harder. So once that had happened, everything just started to get easier. I mean, over the past 7 years, so we've been doing this for 7 years now, over the past 7 years, the cost for packaging has been coming down. There are more options available. We have more locations in range of a compost hauler, so it started around 70% of our locations. It's well over 80% now. So the composting program has just made more and more sense over time. I mean, making it simple. I mean, that was the key. Taking sorting out of the equation, that's absolutely was key for us in making this work. So now I'm going to not bore you too long with tooting our own horn here, but just so you can see some of our accomplishments. In 2017, Taco Time delivered over 11,000 cubic yards of usable compostable material. So that's a diversion number. So we diverted 11,000 cubic yards of material that would otherwise have gone to the landfill, and it was sent to our compost to be made into compost. So as it says there, we can make a community garden the size of half a professional football field. We're reducing our carbon footprint with composting. It's equivalent of 220 cars on the road, taking 220 cars off the road, or the carbon footprint generated by 165 households annually. We created 37,000 bags of usable compost last year. That's 37 truckloads. And that amount would fill up 15 full-size school buses. So, totally understood. Looking at this from a national or an international scale, 37 truckloads of compost, that's not much. But that's every year. Hopefully, the story that I'm telling will make it easier for all of you, who can make the case, whether it's to business or municipalities or to haulers, to composters, that this has just been such a powerful tool for us. And there's been such a positive impact. So before I close, I just the ownership of Taco Time Northwest, again, like I said at the beginning, our customers, our neighbors, family, friends, etc. So authenticity, very important for us. Would want to make sure, practice full disclosure. There's no greenwashing going on here. So a couple of caveats for our composting system. I already mentioned that there are 3 items that are still garbage in the dining room. The single-use milk bottles, juice boxes, and mint wrappers. But I also want to say from the beginning, we have been double stocking some expensive packaging items for use in our drive-thrus. The reason for that is our packaging was not accepted in home yard waste bins by the composter for several years. The reason for that is that as a composter, they're very cognizant of the end quality of their compost product. And there are compostable materials such as PLA that it's very difficult to distinguish between that and regular plastic at the composting facility when it gets poured out on the floor and they have to start sorting it. So while we sent a lot of compostables home with our customers, there were some items that were non-compostable that would be sent home. That said, the City of Seattle does now require that composters accept our packaging in home yard waste bins. So we are working with the City of Seattle, local and regional composters for all of our locations, to make sure that everyone's on board and everyone's going to be okay with our packaging going into home yard waste bins. So that's kind of in progress right now. So then in conclusion, just to reiterate, this has been a huge competitive advantage for us. Customer accounts up 40%, sales up more than that, greater perceived value for our product. Again, if these issues, I feel like they're only going to get more important in all regions. But if they're important in the region where you are right now, and you're willing to do the legwork necessary up front, this can be just such a powerful tool to help expand your business and to do the right thing. So that's pretty much all that I had to say. I'm sorry I didn't include my email here. I'm sure you can get that from Charlotte if you're interested, and I'll definitely stick around for questions later. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Wes. Renaud DeRosier here from Amy's Kitchen. Wes, just want to take a moment and thank you guys at Taco Time Northwest. Definitely a pioneer in the space, and your program is one that we've looked at with a lot of interest as we launched into our own take on compostable packaging. So my name is Renaud DeRosier. I'm the Sustainability Manager here at Amy's, and I'm excited to get a chance to talk to you all today about that transition. So first, a little bit about Amy's. For those of you who are familiar with our products, I can tell you that the story on the box is absolutely true. We are a family company started by Andy and Rachel Berliner. And it's true that in 1987, when their daughter Amy was born, they were dismayed by the fact that they couldn't find any convenient, healthy vegetarian food that they felt good serving to her. So with that, they started Amy's Kitchen in their own kitchen right here in Petaluma. 31 years later, we're still a family-owned company, but we're now available in pretty much every grocery store in the country, as well as internationally. We have over 250 products, and we're now #1 in several natural and organic categories, including frozen entrees, frozen convenience meals, frozen pizzas, canned soups, and shelf-stable chilies. I'm assuming that many of the people on the call are familiar with Amy's, but that most of you are not familiar with our drive-through, and unless you happen to live here in the Bay Area. In 2015, we decided to expand our offering beyond retail by launching the drive-through, an organic vegetarian fast food restaurant here in Sonoma County in Roanoke Park, California. And the idea here was to serve really classic American fare, burgers and fries and shakes, mac and cheese, pizza and burritos, comfort food that's better for you, that's organic. I've only got one restaurant right now, but we are looking to expand the model in coming years and have another outlet coming online in the next year or so. So I want to move on to the agenda for today's conversation. In the brief time I have with all of you today, I want to spend some time talking about how we went through the process of transitioning to renewable materials in our packaging with the idea of collecting those materials for composting. I'm going to talk a little bit about the drivers that pushed us to action and give you some of the details of our program as we built it out. We'll also talk through some of the challenges that came up along the way and how we overcame them, or I should say are overcoming them. Unlike Taco Time Northwest, who's 7 years into this process, this is an ongoing evolution for us. And again, I'll get into the details of it, but this is sort of a real-time case study that we're developing. I'm going to close with a brief plug. We strongly believe that QSR restaurants switching to renewable packaging materials collected for composting is a necessary transition that must occur as we look to keep food waste out of landfills and as we support the transition from a disposable petroleum-based consumption model to a closed-loop approach based on renewable materials. Okay, so from the inception, the drive-through was always supposed to be about the food first. Unfortunately, we quickly found ourselves in a situation where we were unable to escape this nagging problem of packaging, similar to what Wes was describing. We didn't have a good way to deal with our packaging when our customers were done with it. They were expecting a packaging system that lived up to the experience they were having with the food, and the fact of the matter is we just didn't have a great solution for them. So when we first launched, we had a two-bin solution with recycling and trash. Unfortunately, we had really poor results with that. And what I mean by poor results is we had high contamination, which led to really poor diversion rates. And even worse, we had customers that were walking away from the experience feeling confused, frankly, in some cases, feeling bad about themselves for wanting to make the right choice and feeling unable to do so because the sortation requirement was too confusing for them. So a little over a year ago, we started to look into the problem a little bit more closely to understand why the system wasn't working. And like with Taco Time Northwest, we really landed in the same place. The biggest issue really focused on confusion. We were asking too much decision making of our customers who weren't able to consistently work through the complex signage to gauge whether they should recycle or trash any particular item. Most of our customers wanted to comply, but either found themselves overwhelmed by the sortation process, or they didn't have the time, or worse, in some cases, they just didn't care. But regardless of the cause, the result was the same: high levels of contamination and a compromised recycling stream. Plus, we didn't have a good solution for capturing food waste, which has become an increasingly important issue to our customers since we've opened the drive-thru. So pretty soon it became apparent that the way to manage this mess was to simplify to a single stream solution that removes the need to make a decision about each unique material that customers were disposing of. Take the trash and the recycling out of the equation and make everything, the food and the packaging, compostable. Now, looking back on the process, we see that there were actually several drivers that drove us to this. The first was, of course, the poor results that I just talked about, the high contamination, the low diversion, and the unhappy customers. The system just wasn't working. But close behind that was the fact that helping lead the way towards a sustainable QSR packaging ecosystem fits closely with our purpose as a company. Moving toward compostable packaging was the right thing to do because it was the most effective solution for several reasons. So on the front end, compostable packaging is made from renewable materials. And we know this is all a brand new landscape and that some of these materials still have issues. There are inefficiencies in the industry as it grows up. But ultimately, we kept coming back to the fact that these materials are made from plant fibers and agricultural byproducts rather than petroleum. Then on the back end, compostable packaging is a way to close the packaging loop and actually achieve a high level of diversion in the face of highly variable source materials like what we collect in our dining room. Then there's the food waste issue. I'm assuming everyone that's interested enough to join this webinar has heard the stat that if food waste was a country, it would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter on Earth after the US and China. This is unacceptable and something we've got to get a handle on from our perspective as a QSR. And we think using compostable packaging materials in a single stream collection system offers the best mechanism to capture food waste and keep it from landfills. Finally, from a communication standpoint, as Wes alluded to, this fits really well with our brand and with meeting customer expectations. It's clear that compostable packaging is intuitive to our customers who are increasingly demanding it. And then there was a fourth piece, the simple need to comply with the law. So in some ways, I would actually say we're fortunate as a company that was looking to move into this space to be supported by a regulatory environment. But in 2016, the compliance period began on California's mandatory commercial organics recycling law. AB 1826 is what it's called. And it legally required us to find a way to keep food out of landfill. And we knew from experience the only way to make this work was going to be by utilizing compostable packaging materials, since a 3-bin heavy sortation system did not work. Now, we all know that California tends to be a leader around progressive legislation, but it's not just in the Golden State. I won't spend too much time digging into policy issues here, but I know that this coming summer there's a ban on plastic utensils and straws going into effect in Seattle, and we can expect more of these types of regulations as this movement starts to gain some traction. Okay, so with AB 1826 compliance becoming a legal requirement for us as of January 2019, we had to make a change. We were already collecting food scraps in the kitchen and food prep areas, and now we had to come up with a way to collect food waste in the front of house as well. We considered two options. The first one we looked at was the 3-bin solution. This basically would have involved adding a food waste collection bin to the existing trash and recycling streams. But we know that this solution would have required a high level of customer sortation. Should you recycle the pizza box or not? Well, it depends. Is it clean, or did your son use it as a ketchup application palette? What about the clear plastic cup? Well, as long as you remove the lid to pour out the ice and lemon, put the lid back on, but throw away the straw which can't make it through the material recovery facility for collection, then yes, you can recycle it. Otherwise, don't. That's a complicated message, and one that's nearly impossible to effectively communicate to our consumers. Looking further into this option, we also soon realized that a lot of the materials in our stream are not actually high-value recyclables. Those that are, like I said before, require additional processing, and we know that that doesn't consistently occur. So in other words, this solution would have likely resulted in a compounding of the contamination problem that we were already experiencing. So this left us with the second option, which was to go the other way entirely. Instead of going from 2 bins to 3, we went the opposite direction and simplified rather than complicating. We went from 2 bins down to 1 bin. Put a caveat there, which I'll get into in a moment. But essentially what we did was swap out all of our packaging items to get to a place where every single one of them was a renewable plant-based compostable material. We kept our back-of-house recycling, since we use a lot of corrugate and rigid containers in food prep. But for anything in the front of house, whether it's food or packaging, we're now in a position where we can collect it into a single bin. I should note here, though, that in the end we decided to actually provide a second bin, similar to what Wes was describing at Taco Time Northwest, to minimize the contamination of compost. Obviously, this complicates our messaging because it's not a true 1-bin solution, but in the end we felt it was necessary for several reasons. First, because we were observing a certain type of behavior in the dining room that we had not originally planned for and that could not be addressed without a garbage bin. Of course, there was the inevitable car cleaner who brings in his trash on the way to the restaurant. But then we also noticed a couple one day where the husband went across the street to get his favorite chicken meal from a competitor restaurant and came back with a styrofoam iced tea cup. The other thing we learned is that contamination is really a huge concern to composters. And by having a garbage bin available for the items that can't make it into the compost stream, you really increase the quality of the material that you're giving to the composter. So we kept the spirit of the program in place by adding language that spoke to all items from the restaurant going into the compost bin, and clear visual signage with a smaller bin to collect any trash items that were brought in from outside the restaurant. So in summary, our solution to improve our diversion rate and come into compliance with AB 1826 was to completely rethink our material management and waste collection system by redesigning our packaging line around a single stream compostable solution. All right, I'm briefly going to talk about some of the challenges and barriers that we came across. First of all, we've got to acknowledge that this is a highly splintered landscape. There's a lot of complexity when trying to make this changeover. For us, we were looking at 50-some items that we had to switch to compostable. And, frankly, there are many different vendors that have some challenges associated with them, and the information can be unclear as you try to navigate the landscape. So a couple tips that I would pass along to the group here. First, picking and choosing individual items simply won't cut it. It'll leave you vulnerable to contamination and, again, the problem of sortation. You've got to basically change over everything or as close to everything as possible for a single bin solution like this to work. In our case, we were fortunate. We don't have any rigid beverage containers, so we were able to essentially shoot for 100% changeover, which we did. I really want to emphasize, though, that this includes all the support materials, too. It's not just your branded food service ware, but also cutlery and straws, the bags that are used to collect the materials in the bins. And in some cases, you won't be able to find solutions. We looked long and hard and were never able to find a mustard packet that was compostable. So in that case, we ended up actually switching the format. Now have small PLA portion cups and mustard that customers can serve themselves from a larger bin. So again, I realize that it can be sort of an intimidating landscape because of some of the lingering stories of bad actors with materials that turned out not to be compostable and sort of lingering bad impressions from an industry that, if we're honest about it, is really about 20 years old. One thing I can really wholeheartedly endorse here is using the work of others. BPI is really the gold standard out there that can help you ensure that all the materials you're switching to are compatible with the ASTM standards that guide compostability of these materials. That's the D6400 and the D6868 standards. Again, not to spend too much time plugging BPI, but their website is a great resource that you can go to get information for particular categories of materials, and they'll list compostables that, whether you're looking for straws or cups or napkins. If you find it on the BPI website, you should be in a position where you've got a material that you can trust. All right, the second challenge and barrier that came into play was the structural piece around off-taking. So for us, we were in a situation where our local composter does not accept compostable packaging materials. And while I believe there's value in switching to compostable materials regardless of whether or not they are collected in the compost stream, simply to support the growth of an industry, the real value of these types of programs is in closing the loop on food and packaging waste collection. But the fact of the matter is composters likely don't accept these materials in most areas across the country. Still, we think that shouldn't keep you from pursuing this path. For us, it took some work, but a year in, we feel good about the investment that we made. We had to work with our local composter, like I said, to really validate the fact that they would not accept it. And when that became clear, we found another source. So we actually toured local composters and found a facility that would take our material. We had to work with government agencies, both at the county and city level, to get them to agree to release the current facility from the franchise agreement that required that we take our materials to them. Again, a significant investment of time, but one that we felt was really worth doing. So we're through that process now. We're still waiting on permitting, so we haven't yet switch the signage in our restaurant because we don't want to confuse our customers with multiple changeovers. So we've swapped out all the materials and we're ready to go. Within the next 2 months, the permit should clear that will allow us to start bringing these materials to the new facility that we've identified. Then the third challenge is really on the communication and messaging front. I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that although single-stream composting for food and packaging may seem intuitive to the packaging, restaurant, and composting professionals on this webinar, they may seem foreign to many, certainly many of our customers in our dining rooms. The key thing here was crafting a brand-aligned messaging strategy and education campaign. This is essential to getting a successful program. And again, Wes pointed to it before. If you get the education component right, you can minimize the contamination that otherwise is going to keep your composter from being happy with the success of the program. So a couple things that you really need to hit on, I think, is basic explanation of what this is. How can it be that you can take your coffee cup and the last few sips of your latte and turn it into a soil amendment, right? That's not something that comes overly intuitively to most people. The second key messaging is really to stress the importance of compliance with the program to avoid contamination. And on a similar note, for us, we felt that it was really important to avoid greenwashing and make clear that we are talking about a commercial composting facility. Really discourage customers from taking these materials home, trying to put them in their own backyard compost, and not having success. So in addition to developing these materials for your customers, it's really important to remember that your front line, your ambassador core, if you will, is the people on the ground that are serving the food. So we created a series of video trainings. This speaks, I think, to the turnover that Jeff was talking about earlier. 70% seems like a staggeringly high number, but we definitely see it in our restaurant. These are relatively young kids, some of them in high school and college jobs, and they don't necessarily stick around all that long. So constantly retraining, and again, just really emphasizing the same key items from what we're communicating to the consumers. Okay, so I want to quickly acknowledge that those barriers that I was just talking about might very well seem pretty daunting. But I want to end with a few words of encouragement for those of you that are thinking about making the switch to compostable packaging, but feeling like the entrenched systems are sort of colluding against you to keep it from happening. Keep at it. It's really important to keep pushing on this because I think just looking at our customers, it's clear to see that there's a critical mass assembling around this. So yeah, we've got to acknowledge the fact that the systems aren't perfect. The communication is inconsistent. The laws vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, from municipality to municipality. But overall, customers are asking for this. Every year we see more and more of a push towards moving to compostable serveware for these disposable items that I think people rightly see should not be designed with a 500-year life in mind. I like to think of compostable packaging in a way as being sort of a hero technology for the material and packaging industry. Think of it as kind of like what solar panels are to the energy system, right? The incumbents still have cost and efficiency advantages because of their economies of scale and their legacy of externalizing the impact of their industries over the past half dozen decades or so. But despite that, customers are flocking to what they see as the future beyond this shadow of fossil resources. And keeping food from landfill is another movement that will only expand from here. Even in parts of the country that don't yet have food collection infrastructure, people and governments are starting to understand the importance of the issue, and they're designing systems in real time to support food waste collection. We strongly feel that compostable packaging can be the catalyst that makes this a widespread practice and one that has success in actually keeping food waste out of the landfill. So in closing, we believe it's a behavioral reality that the sortation requirement of a 3-bin system will inevitably lead to high contamination in the QSR environment, and that a comprehensive switch to food collection and compostable packaging is the only way to drive high diversion in these types of restaurants. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Renaud.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, Ryan, go ahead. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Charlotte. Hey, everyone. Thank you very much for your time and coming to this webinar and listening to this really important subject. And to all the other speakers, I've absolutely learned a lot, and it's great to see the perspective from the restaurant side as a hauler and composter. And to ride on the positivity that Renaud was just touching on, you know, I co-founded the Compost Crew, and I'm currently the CEO 7 years ago. And at that time, we were talking to people in the DC metro area, and we were explaining what composting was, why it's important. Today, everyone from individual homeowners and renters to businesses are approaching us trying to figure out how they can go zero waste. And it's the collective movement throughout the country towards zero waste, and recognizing, as Renaud, I thought, really eloquently put, that the incumbent businesses have not been including the external costs, namely the environmental costs of not going zero waste. And so that's kind of where I always love to start my presentations, is to show this photo. In college, taught English and Spanish in some developing countries, and the one thing that, and there are many things that will stick with me, one thing that I know will always stick with me was there's a community that has developed on a landfill in the capital of Nicaragua, in Managua. And this is not my photo, but this is what you'd expect to see, houses built with reused metal of the landfill. And really the point for me, and what resonated with me, is that in a modern society, taking what we don't want to use anymore and putting it in a hole in the ground seems like a very irrational solution when we're talking about all these scarce and valuable resources that we're losing. So just from a high level, the importance that we're all seeing more and more of composting and going zero waste, and that frankly, you know, beyond just the positive reasons of eliminating waste because it just doesn't feel right that we should waste anything, there's definitely a strong economic incentive. And I know with restaurants where you're producing your waste, as Renaud was amazingly has shown, can pretty much be 100% recycled. And that's really powerful, but it also, from an environmental perspective, but it's also extremely powerful when you're talking about your brand image and perception by a millennial cohort that is only just starting to get into the mix as a really strong player in the economy. And certainly we've seen the benefits from that as a hauler, and just throughout the DC metro area as interested observers, that the demand is really starting to pick up a head of steam. We compost for a multi-unit complex in downtown Silver Spring, and their leasing agents are telling people that they offer composting as an amenity, and they consider it a value enhancer that's giving them a competitive advantage to those that other people in the property management space, and that parallel can be pushed out across industry and verticals. There's absolutely a strong economic motivation, albeit what I found not necessarily in the bottom line in the short term. You're adding another collection, you're making investments in compostable ware that right now are not usually as affordable as non-compostable wares. However, as both of the speakers, Wes and Renat, had pointed out, by making that investment now, we're creating the demand that will lead to the technological innovation that I've seen over the last 7 years for driving costs down and creating higher value products, specifically in the compostable ware area. So I'm grazing over this slide only because I feel like everyone on this call understands the benefits, but one thing that I really like to highlight is composting isn't just about zero waste. It's about getting compost back into our soil. Just use of synthetic fertilizers, production of synthetic fertilizers is a huge contributor to our carbon footprint, and composting is the surest solution to go back to how we used to farm, which is a lot more healthy and sustainable way to produce our crops. So going into what is compostable, and I love kind of going here because, and I was actually inspired to hear that that Amy's is going with a 1-bin-ish system because that's really the key. Is there's, especially in the restaurant space, you really can have 100% or near 100% of your stuff, barring people bringing in competitors' food, which is a pain and not fun for more reasons than just that it's not zero waste. You can really capture so much, and this is all stuff that until the last few years had been just wasted. And it really does come down to that initial commitment of making the investment for the compostable ware, for the in the restaurant space for the compostable ware. And as Renat had mentioned, that you have the low value recyclables. So in that case, it kind of makes sense to just switch over to compostables. And so to give you some hauler's perspective, and another thing I recognize from these speakers, which isn't as common on the East Coast yet, is that they understand the challenges of haulers and specifically composting facilities, because really haulers will take, they'll empty the bin and bring it where you want to bring it. But the question is, when it gets to the facility, is the facility going to handle it? We've had, it was a few years ago, a $20 million partly owned facility by Waste Management that was shut down by state of Delaware, because to try to drive up revenue and cover costs, they would take anything that someone would dump there. And contamination became such a problem that the state had to step in and shut them down. Contamination kills facilities at all scales, and it's extremely important that the customers that are paying for these services understand the importance of and the challenge of reducing that. I think that my conclusion, I tend to side with the two previous speakers, that as much as possible, going with compostable ware and keeping it simple for both your staff and your customers is the way to go. Because no matter what happens, unless you have someone standing over your bins all day, and even then it can be tough, you're going to have contamination. And to kind of really pinpoint that, I was just in Mexico City. They made huge investments in a municipal-wide organics collection. So they have the organicos and inorganicos bins, and throughout the city, at the parks, at all places of businesses, they have the 3 bins: trash, recycle, and compost. And it's amazing. It's like, oh my God, they're a league above the rest, at least to the East Coast of the U.S. And unfortunately, when I went and took a closer look, the 3 bins, judging by the contents, were completely indistinguishable. And so at that point, the compost facility is going to be really struggling. They're going to have state-of-the-art technology to manage all that contamination, and you're losing all the potential of the stuff that could have been taken out of the trash and recycling stream. So that comes down to an education of your community and a cultural shift that us all being interested in this and early adopters are helping to drive it forward. So by making these investments as businesses and individuals, we're getting towards that future where people will really understand the difference between the bins, and you'll see that play out in less contamination, more accurate sorting, just at the micro level. And it hasn't really been touched on, I don't believe yet, but one thing I did want to say, that a common challenge, or I would say objection, that I will get when we're pitching to businesses and homeowners, really any customer, is worrying about smells and rodents. And since it hasn't brought up, I assume that everyone's kind of come to the same conclusion. So long as you have a reliable hauler that comes when they say they're going to come, and you are smart about not putting a giant vat of sauce or boiling oil or something in your compost bin that's clearly going to make a mess, the smells and the rodents, and getting bins that are suited for organics that either have a latch or a weighted lid or something along those lines, you're not going to be dealing with smells, you're not going to be dealing with rodents, and it's a rather clean process. Additionally, by switching to compostable ware, another benefit is you end up with more browns in your bin, which absorb liquids and basically keep things tidier overall. So there's another benefit for going that route. And the opportunities, from what I've seen, are more qualitative and frankly can be difficult to quantify. But the reality for me is that in the long term, it's going to be a necessary thing that businesses are offering that have a zero-waste strategy and are sustainably minded and are offering that have compost available and are actively involved in that. I know that millennials are going to continue to demand that, and younger generations only more so. And so it really comes down to being responsible, covering the true cost of disposal, the environmental impact on one side, and then which is just important as a citizen of our country, and then on the other side of benefiting from the brand recognition of being an early adopter, of driving forward and getting passionate advocate customers that love you because you have strong values in line with them, and that's a rare thing, and it's extremely important more and more in today's economy. So there's strong opportunity here for people that are willing to dive full force into it, and I'm excited, as it has tended to happen. The West Coast is 5-10-ish years ahead of the East Coast, to see this wave really take shape in the DC area and up and down the coast as well. And that's pretty much all I've gotten. I just like ending on this note that waste is a human invention. We were born into a world with a lot of waste, and I think the people on this call will agree that we're not going to accept it going forward. And with the technology out there and with the people working towards this zero waste future, I'm more confident than I've ever been that we're going to get there. And it's extremely exciting to have all these people on this call interested in making the change in the restaurant business. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Ryan. That was really, really wonderful. And to all of the speakers and their presentations that we've just gone through, I'd love to be able to talk and answer some of the questions that audience members have sent in. I know we don't have a lot of time to do that, but for the next 5 or so minutes, I'd love to ask you all thoughts on several of them. So to start, Ryan, I think you made a really excellent point that getting the bins right is really critical. And Jeff, I think you illustrated that it's one of, space concerns is one of the largest reasons limiting restaurants from composting. Renaud and Wes, if you might be able to tell us a bit more about the space considerations at Amy's and Taco Time and how that decision-making process or strategy was thought through in the front of house and the back of house.
Renaud, do you want me to start?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Okay. So definitely prompt me if I forget I forget any parts of the question there. So what we ended up doing was, since we already had a single garbage enclosures in the dining room, we just basically redid signage and made them compost bins. And Renaud also touched on this, that, you do have people bringing trash in from the car and from outside, so you do need to have some accommodation for that. But honestly, for us, especially after the reputation began to build, as far as it being 100% compostable, people stopped bringing their garbage in. There were people that would bring in outside food, and there is the little garbage on the top for those kinds of situations, and people do appreciate that. But so because that infrastructure was already in place, that wasn't really an issue for us. Same in the back of the house. You have a little bit more control back there. So also, as Renaud said in his presentation, you can do more training, you can do more sorting in the back, but signage is really critical. It's great if you can do video training, although, to be honest, we don't do video training just because we've made the effort to make the signage as logical as possible, and also there's just very little garbage left in the back of the house. So for example, we've gone from probably 70-30 garbage and recycling 7 years ago to about 45% compost, 45% mixed recycling, and about 10% garbage. It really depends on the general manager and how much focus they are able to put on it in the back of the house. So it's really just repurposing infrastructure that you already have. And then as far as outside, we make a point of using compostable trash bags in all of our containers, so there's no reason to have to keep washing it out or changing the compost dumpster, things like that. Because while we were pretty careful about how we cited waste enclosures when we first built our restaurants, if you're just pouring food not in a bag into your compost dumpster, it's going to be a problem. So even though it's a little bit more money and we would just for the compostable bags, we do factor that cost into our operation to make sure that it stays clean and odor-free. So that's what I have to say. Renaud, jump in.
Yeah. So I would add, just the theme is really consistency. I think every bin's got to look the same. The messaging's got to be the same everywhere. And again, our system is not yet in place, so we'll see. But based on a year of kind of observation of the current system and what's not working, we really think that having the visual cue of having a really large open bin within the existing cabinet, although we're redoing the surface on it, with clear signage that anything you got in the restaurant goes here. And then a really exclusionary, de-emphasized, smaller diameter opening for trash is how we're going to approach it. And then, as Wes was saying, back of house looks about the same as it ever has.
Thanks, guys. So I think we might only have time for one more question, and we had a couple come in about the relationship between being able to compost organics and being able to donate leftover food. So Jeff, we have a question for you relating to the State of Restaurant Sustainability Report and whether you guys investigated the ratio of donated to composted food. And then Renaud and Wes, if you might be able to speak to that and discuss whether you guys do or are considering donating food in addition to the organics recycling.
Yeah, so this is Jeff. No, we didn't look at the ratio. Unfortunately, a very low percentage of restaurants are actually donating food as well, and it's a similar response of lack of education, lack of infrastructure, transportation concerns, liability concerns, even though many people know about the Good Samaritan Act. In addition, a major concern isn't necessarily liability, but if you're a larger brand, that there's brand risk. So look at Chipotle. While that wasn't donated food, there was a serious reduction in stock value. So if you're an internationally publicly traded company, that is a real concern for donating food. So there's still a lot of education that needs to go on there. There's still a lot of infrastructure development for donated food. But, as we all know, with the food waste hierarchy, that is certainly the better place to put it where you can. But usually front of house, you can't donate food at all. So it ends up being, either fed to animals or composted.
I would add that I think that the two programs are actually potentially complementary. And the reason is, I think the initial impression might be that, hey, if you've got an easier solution, you just stick it in the compost bin, you will with food that you otherwise would have donated. But I don't think that's the case. As Jeff was saying, there's a clear delineation between what can be donated and what can't. And the stuff that can be donated would be, for instance, a tray of unused, hamburger buns or that sort of thing, right? It's not individual items from the front of house. So I think by having the composting solution, you're really elevating the value of food as a resource even after people are done with it. So I don't know. I kind of think of it as kind of rising all boats and being potentially supportive of a food waste donation program.
The only thing that I would add to that, and as far as food donation is concerned, our business model is based around making everything kind of as we go, and cooking fresh every day. And we really don't have much waste, very little food waste at the end of the night. So based on some of the concerns that Jeff mentioned, just as far as infrastructure being in place, transportation liability, et cetera, we really haven't looked very hard at that just because we don't, anything that would get thrown away or composted, would be spoiled, I would say, not edible, not donatable. So that's all I would say.
Definitely makes sense. Well, thank you guys so much for your thoughts here and in the presentations. I fear that's all the time we have for questions today, but Ryan, Renaud, Wes, and Jeff, thank you so much for participating. This has been really phenomenal.
You bet.
Thanks for having.
It's a pleasure.
Glad to help.
I'd like to ask that if you've enjoyed today's webinar, please consider becoming a member of the Composting Collaborative. Any company, organization, or government entity is eligible to become a member, and membership is free. It's a quick online application at our website, compostingcollaborative.org, and you'll be able to stay in the loop about the Composting Collaborative's work, in-person events, and future webinars. To let everyone know about our May webinar that will be happening next month, on May 9th, same time, 1 to 2:15 p.m. East Coast. It's a really interesting topic. We'll be exploring co-collecting organic waste with landfill waste with Deb Darby from Organic Solutions, Mark Wesson from Boulder County, Colorado, that's just implemented a commercial co-collection program for generators like restaurants and food service operators, and Jody Gallup from Medina, Minnesota, who's facilitated a residential co-collection program. So with that, I'd like to wish everyone a great rest of their Tuesday, and thanks so much again to all of our speakers, Jeff, Wes, Renaud, and Ryan. This has been really phenomenal. Thanks again.
Stand by.